First, can I say, even as you're taking seats, so don't worry, please do, well done. 10 a.m. and a full crowd. I'm impressed, because I feel we had an excellent reception last night for Conservative Home, thanks to TheCityUK and to Heathrow for that, for the 1922 committee. And I'm slightly tired, got 2 waters, and I didn't touch a drop. So anyway, thank you for coming. We've got a great panel with us this morning. I think the most useful thing is, let's pretend I don't really know anything about growth, which means they can explain exactly what they mean, why they think it's important, or where they play their role in it. Many of you will know more, but it's helpful for me to pretend that I don't, because then I can get more out of you. I'm going to do something I like to do. We will get to questions. Please make sure they are a question and not a small statement of intent. I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. They know themselves better than I do, and that will give you a little insight. We'll just go very quickly down the table, introduce yourselves, just a tiny bit about what you do, and then we'll get to your opening remarks, and we'll do it whichever way I choose. Miles, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So, Miles Selleck, Chief Executive of TheCityUK, which is the private sector-led representative body for financial and related professional services in the UK.
Thanks, Miles. Hi, I'm Sam Deave. I'm the Director of UK Government Affairs at Standard Chartered, a British bank, been around for about 170 years, a very large global presence across Asia, Africa and the Middle East.
I'm Gareth Davis, Member of Parliament for Grantham and Bourne, now coolly Shadow Exchequer Secretary, having served as Exchequer Secretary for a year and a half. Before that, I was on the Treasury Select Committee, PPS to the Chancellor Exchequer, and spent 14 years in finance before politics.
I'm going to have to get used to saying this. I'm Giles Dilnott, and I'm the editor of Conservative Home.
Cherie Howard, Executive Director of Authorisations at the Financial Conduct Authority, which looks after and regulates about 42,000 firms, in charge of regulating and authorising people as they come into the perimeter, as well as providing support to consumers and firms through our phone lines.
Let's start off then. The word regulation and growth.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing people jump on. But as I say, they may not know quite how it works. Why don't you set us up with your opening remarks about where we go and how we achieve that thing that everybody wants to see? Growth.
Thank you. So I thought I'd sort of talk about our role a bit, and also some of the things I think that need to happen. So look, we're a global leader in financial services, but we need to have and remain attractive to domestic and international firms in order to strive to seek access and maintain access to funding, continued innovation, and ensure the growth of the financial services sector in the UK economy as a whole. So I was going to raise 7 things. So firstly, we must continue to ensure that the UK's regulatory regime is seen as world-leading, proportionate, predictable, evidence-based, and subject to regular review with accountability. It's important as regulators we're efficient and effective, and I know that from my authorisations role, but also that we are seen to support growth and innovation across the UK. We must maintain and push for high global standards and maintain our role on the global stage in that, and the FCA is active participants in IOSCO, GFIN and other international bodies. It's absolutely critical we work together to ensure our markets are clean in all respects, from all forms of financial crime, and that requires a partnership across all parties, regulators, government and other agencies. Fifthly, we must support and drive and develop homegrown and overseas and be attractive to overseas talent and retain it. Ensuring we have diverse talent in the UK is critical to drive growth of the economy. 6, we must support deep trading relationships globally and internationally. We have world-leading solutions. It's critical we therefore play them into the world stage. And 7th, we must have an open societal debate about risk and reward trade-off. It's absolutely critical. We can drive greater proportionality. We can absolutely and are looking at driving some more risk into the system. But obviously with more risk comes the risk of downside. So we must have that debate about what is our true risk appetite as a UK society.
Thank you very much indeed. Gareth, one of the things that is interesting about government is all governments want growth. They can do things to aid growth, but you can't promise it, can you?
Well, you've definitely got to put in place the foundations to ensure that you've got an environment where businesses can drive growth, for sure. But you've got to diagnose the problem, as it were, in terms of the challenges as to why we've not had productivity at the levels of other countries like Germany. In the last government, we were very clear that there were essentially two parts to this: workforce participation and business investment. Workforce participation is one of the reasons why we implemented childcare reform, why we had the Back to Work plan to ensure that we're tackling long-term sickness and those who are disabled not able to get into the workplace, and a variety of other measures, for example, on welfare. And then on business investment, ensuring that you've got a tax environment that's conducive to reinvestment of profits, and that's why we implemented the full expensing and R&D reform and things like that. But ultimately, what we're here this morning to talk about is financial services in particular, an area and sector that I know very well, and an underappreciated sector when it comes to driving growth, not just for the whole country, but across the United Kingdom. 2/3 of the jobs of the sector are actually based outside of the city. It's not always appreciated, I think, that fact. And so it is a key driver of employment in the regions, but it's also a key driver of financing of entrepreneurs and innovation at universities and in communities like in Grantham and Bourne, where I represent. And so, first and foremost, a recognition of the importance of the sector, not just in terms of the tax revenue that gets talked about all the time, but the power that the mobilization of capital can have. And to do that, you have to have a competitive regulatory environment focused not just on protection, but on growth. You have to have, as I said, a tax environment that is competitive and fair and promotes the kind of activity that you want to have. And thirdly, you need a system whereby you can attract global talent to ensure that you've got the best and the brightest fueling that growth through financial services, particularly when you're thinking about things like AI and fintech. And so those are the things that we were very conscious of in government. Perhaps we could have done more. I'm sure somebody will point that out. But that is the key, I think, to ensuring that FS is motoring. And it's critical, not just for the pure economic reasons. If you think about a lot of the challenges that we face in government as a country, as a world, as a population, global population, whether it's climate change, energy infrastructure, tackling inequality, financial services, is key to all of that. Where I wish we could go way further is to democratize private capital a lot better, making sure that pension funds are, frankly, more invested in this country, more invested in growth companies and some of the stories that will be fueling our innovation and growth of the future. We need to ensure that we, really give people, younger people, a stake in the economy. There's this strange dichotomy that we have votes at 18, but yet so many 18-year-olds don't actually have a stake in the economy. And that's quite bad for us as a party, quite frankly. And it's not just about housing, it's about ownership of companies and share ownership and pension funds. That's why I pushed for auto-enrollment to the 18 and 22-year-olds, for example. So there's a lot more we can do. And then finally, we have in this country got to get better about understanding risk and knowing that not taking risk can be riskier than taking risk, and being brave about that, frankly. But we can come on to that.
Yes, if somebody doesn't mention could we have done more, I'm sure I will.
Yeah.
In case. Samantha, you said Standard Chartered operates Far East and things like that. My only bit from the Foreign Office was, the Indo-Pacific tilt wasn't just a slogan, it's where the action is. Is that where we're going to drive it from your point of view? And also, so many people don't realise financial services isn't just banking.
Mm-hmm. That's
Correct. Thanks, Giles. And actually, really great to hear from Cherie that the FCA are very much focused on the need for good international partnerships and trade as well. As one of the faces, I guess, of British business and British financial services across the globe, I wanted to highlight the contribution of FS trade to the economy. So I'm pinching some TheCityUK stats. But in 2022, the sector generated a trade surplus of around £95 billion. That's the largest of any sector in the UK, and equivalent to just under 4% of GDP. So the trade side and the international partnership side really is important to the FS sector, and we've really welcomed that engagement across government from a financial services perspective, from a treasury perspective, with markets like those in the Indo-Pacific, so India, Singapore. We're seeing really high growth in markets in ASEAN, in GCC, and I think those are continue to be important to be engaging with. And when we talk about trade, we often think purely on FTAs and sort of trade agreements. And I guess an area I really wanted to highlight as an important piece of the puzzle for financial services is the need for things like economic and financial dialogues bilaterally between the UK and high growth markets in order to really benefit both sides, but also for that market access and policy development.
Miles, I was going to pick up on something that Gareth said, and I was talking to TheCityUK last night about this. That important point that whilst the city is an engine of the economy, so much of what you're doing isn't in London.
Yeah. And it's absolutely right. And look, the reality is, and I'm delighted Gareth's already used the stat that 2/3 of the jobs in the industry are outside the M25, because it is a TheCityUK stat, and it's not an official TheCityUK meeting until it's used. You've got 66,000 jobs in Birmingham in this industry, nearly 180,000 in the West Midlands in this industry. The fastest growing employment is outside the M25. In Birmingham itself, my old employer has now got HSBC has got its UK headquarters. You've got Goldman's, you've got Deutsche, Manchester's doing incredibly well, Edinburgh. I mean, these are all massive success stories for the UK. I mean, Bournemouth, biggest employer in Bournemouth is JP Morgan. Who knew? Biggest employer in Belfast is Citigroup, the huge American bank. London's a fantastic shop window to the rest of the world, and we shouldn't denigrate it in any way. It's a massive advantage. Any other European country would give their right arm for a problem, inverted commas, like London. But it is a great way of then growing those jobs elsewhere. And I think you look at what people like Andy Burnham or Andy Street, when he was here, were doing in terms of using the industry as a way of supercharging growth. Some really interesting thinking going on. You need to look, there's a sort of alchemy to this about driving growth and the role that financial and professional services can play in it, because it's a mixture of tax, and that's going to be really important in terms of how we go forward. Obviously, we're all looking at what may happen on the 30th of October, and I'm sure that will come up on this panel. It's talent, it's tying in with the universities, again, some interesting work going on there. It's tech. It's trade, which we've talked about, hugely important. We are the number one. I'm going to throw another stat in to support Sam's. We are the number one net exporter of financial services on the planet, and it's not even close. I mean, we're way ahead of the Americans, who are number two.
Just quickly, though, we do know that Frankfurt, Paris, there are lots of places who'd like to they're desperate to take the slot. Desperate to take that slot, and if we are complacent, they will. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it will be Paris or Frankfurt. I think it's more likely that it'll be New York or Singapore or Hong Kong or somewhere in the Middle East. And again, we can sort of explore that later. So we can't be complacent. This is a massive national advantage. All the research that we do with the public shows that actually the public are proud of the fact that we are a leading country when it comes to financial services. And this is where we come on to regulation. So I'm certainly not going to beat up Cherie here at all, because I think, Cherie, you've raised what I think is the critical issue here, which is the approach we have as a society on risk. And to be fair, the FCA and what the FCA does, or the FRC, or Ofgem, or Ofwat, or whoever it is, all the economic regulators are downstream of a decision we have made as a society, which I think risks sometimes infantilizing the debate. I mean,
from a perspective on financial services, one of the reasons that you don't get pension returns and retirement returns as good as the ones we get in Australia or Australians or Canadians do is because we have incentivized investing in gilts or bonds over equities. And of course, you get a far better return on equities. I mean, at one point we were being told with Solvency II, which is I won't go into huge amounts of detail, although I see some pained looks in the audience, so people are familiar with it. At one point we were being told by the European Union that you shouldn't invest in equities because this was risky, but you should invest in Greek government debt in around 2012 because government debt was not risky. And it's that kind of approach that we are still suffering from. And it is the financial services version of the thing that made my heart sink when I walked into my hotel and saw a little sign over the hot water tap that said, "Danger may contain hot water." I mean, this is an approach that we have taken that makes no sense at all, is costing us growth, and we need to fundamentally change.
Thank you very much indeed. That sign on hot water and just a little snippet from the inside of government. I was once on a plane, we were flying to Latin America, and the sign on the shower said no more than 3 people. Bizarre. Anyway, we're going to get to questions. You will know a lot more than I do, so make sure your questions are incisive, but please that they are questions. Let's not do long statements. We have 2 microphones in the room, so we're going to take 2 questions at a time. I will try to be fair, and let's go those 2 first, and then I will get to others.
Thank you. Tom McPhail. I work in financial services. I work in pensions. We've already heard about a competitive regulatory environment and about getting pension funds investing in the UK economy. We are blessed in the UK of having not 1 but 2 regulators overseeing our pension system. We have the FCA doing fantastic work, and we also have the pensions regulator. Could the panel make the case for persisting with 2 regulators rather than consolidating our regulatory problems into just 1? Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Clark, April 6, we work with science and innovation organisations, and I used to work in insurance. How do we better invest? There's some talk there about better investing in high growth sectors. How do we do that? I mean, the Mansion House Compact was a great start, and hopefully the current Chancellor is going to continue with that. The LIFT scheme, I've heard from people, was well-intentioned but kind of didn't really work. It'd be great to hear from the panel a bit about investing in science and innovation. How can we do that?
Right, the way this is going to work, panel, is I want you to jump in if this is something you're eager to do. We don't have to do absolutely everybody if you don't want to. Who would like to pick up on the pensions regulation? Miles, good.
I'm happy to kick off. Tom, that's quite the challenge. But look, structures are important, but structures and strategy are downstream of culture. So for me, the issue isn't necessarily what's the structure of the regulators that we've got, although clearly there's a debate to have around that. The question is, what's the culture? So if you are setting 1, 2, 3, 4, however many regulators there are, twin peaks, multiple peaks, single peak, whatever it is, if you're setting them a direction as a society, which is you've got to push all the risk out of the system and produce something that frankly is going to be challenged by just leaving your money in a high interest account for a while, then we're in the wrong place. So I'm not dismissive of the role of structure in this, and obviously as industry one's always very conscious of costs and duplication, but I think there is a much wider discussion that we need to have. There's no point having one regulator with the wrong set of directions and culture and expectations as a society, or 3 regulators. It's how are we taking that forward. In terms of the better investment in the high growth sectors, Jim, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and one of the things that we have argued for a long time is a clear strategy for financial services, both as an industry, but also how it is an enabler for growth elsewhere in the economy. And one of the things I thought the last government did really well was the life sciences strategy, and there was a life sciences council around that. And there was a piece of work that we led together with the Bioindustry Association about how we make sure that companies, startups and scale-ups in the UK that still are too often going off to Boston to grow, It's not as if we lack world-class universities here. It's not as if we lack a world-class financial services system. It's not as if we lack world-class companies here. Why are they going off to Boston? And the people who are actually catching up with Boston isn't us. It's the French. Now, they're doing it in a slightly different way, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend over the long term. But I think there needs to be a clear sense of expectation in terms of which industries we are prioritising. This is not about picking winners. This is about recognising comparative advantage.
I know it's difficult, and that's the honest answer,
Yes,
isn't
it
it?
is. It is, but key and
It's
critical.
on the pensions.
Yes, on the pension structure of regulation. So that, but we shouldn't be focused on structure. We should be focused on working together in partnership, and that to me is critical. All regulators, be that the CMA, the FRC, all of us have to work together on our various areas to make sure we're driving the growth in the UK economy. So a critical one for us at the moment is working with the TPR and the Department of Work and Pensions on driving the value for money framework in pensions to make sure that people are focused on the long-term growth and not the short-term cost, which is where people have been focused. So that's critical because obviously if we drive for the long term, we go into long-term returns, we go into the wider debate about risk and reward.
On the investment question, I know you want to pick up, and then we'll come to you, Sam.
So I think in terms of driving growth companies, I think of it in perhaps three ways. First of all is tax, then institutions, and then basically pools of capital. So if you think about what VCT and EIS has done, that has kind of been a major driver actually of a lot of the investment that's gone into early stage growth companies and why it constantly gets extended. I think we've extended it now to 2035. I think this Labour government has agreed to take that on as well. And so tax does have a part to play, particularly when you're talking about additional early stage risk. When it comes to institutions, we have the British Business Bank, who also have done a tremendous job actually of helping mobilise capital, but also step in where perhaps investment hasn't been going traditionally for commercial reasons, but provides that support mechanism. And I think they're providing a significant amount of VC capital in this country today. And just as we were leaving office, I was working very closely with Louis at the British Business Bank to find ways in which we could act as a go-between between pension funds and the British Business Bank. And I hope that this new government will sort of take that work forward. And then the third part of it in terms of capital is, I guess, two parts as relates to pension funds. Transparency is a key factor, and just even having annual statements, annual reports, which shows what you're invested in, but also what you're not invested in, I think could make a big difference, because you'll have trustees and pensioners asking, why on earth am I not invested in that over there with that big bar chart? And spin-outs is a key part of this as well, where we have been historically behind the curve when it comes to mobilising, for example, local government pension fund assets towards local university spin-outs of companies. We did a review of this and changed the compensation dynamics to be more in line with the United States. And I think over time that will start to materialize into some really interesting technology and medicines coming out of universities, getting the capital it needs to be able to grow and scale up in this country.
I completely agree. I think it's been quite hard for key sectors that the UK has been leading in R&D, science and innovation, technologies such as net zero technologies, which other markets do look to the UK as an innovation hub for those to scale, and there really is more opportunity for investment into those and for the UK to be doing more to ensure there's an environment to support that, not just for the development here, but also so that those technologies can be exported overseas and then sort of supported across the rest of the world. So, thanks.
Now, to be a supporter of full diversity, we had two gentlemen, I have two ladies. You and you, please. I will try to get to everybody. it's never always possible.
Hi, so I'm Eleanor Cox, and I was a London Assembly candidate, a general election candidate, and I also run a London team, SME banking team for Lloyds. And I just wanted to point out that we spend 18 billion on the police, but we spend 38 billion on financial services just on financial compliance. That's last year, and that has been rising rapidly. So I think it rose 20% last year. When you actually look at how much financial crime is that actually you're combating, how effective is that 38 billion that's being spent, which is, it's bigger than the size of Barclays' revenue. Is this really effective, and are we asking and doing too much financial compliance at the front end that's actually prohibiting more business from opening bank accounts or opening funds here without it actually being effective?
Good morning. My name is Tasha. I'm the Cayman Islands government representative to the UK. Miles, I've heard you say that the UK family of financial services is a success story. And the challenge has been that the narrative, the popular narrative around some of the family is not an accurate representation of those jurisdictions. I can certainly say that anybody that gets their information about the Cayman Islands from legitimate sources will know that we've built a financial services center of excellence that is prides itself on transparency, anti-money laundering regime, and ensuring taxes are paid where they're supposed to. My question to Gareth really is the opposition in government going to be brave in helping to address the misperceptions and the incorrect information about the broader British global family in this space? And I ask that against the backdrop of the fact that currently 150 billion pounds of funding, of investments, flows through the Cayman Islands, uses structures in the Cayman Islands to support investment and building of the economy in the UK. More is needed, but this story needs to be addressed.
Let's do these separately so we keep on track with that. Money spent on financial crime, but money spent on regulation, for want of a better word. Is the balance wrong?
So I started off by number one by saying that regulation needs to be world-leading, proportionate, predictable, evidence-based, and subject to review. So the points I would raise is obviously we are focused on proportionality, and clearly we might not have got that balance right in all places. And we've recently opened the call for input post the consumer duty being implemented on where we could take out other regulation because the consumer duty is now in place. We have recently in capital markets made listing regime more proportionate. We are consulting on the prospectus regime being more proportionate. So from that perspective, I would say we are open to having the conversation. But equally, one of my points was ensuring we have clean markets. So, to attract international investment, people want to come to a market that they know is clean, won't be defrauded, won't be subject to market abuse or money laundering. So from my perspective, we need to make sure we get the balance right.
Have we got the balance right, guys? Did we, and are they?
Well, the fastest growing department in any company shouldn't be the compliance department, is the first thing I'd say. But you do have to get the balance right between protection, as I say, and competitiveness. What did we do? We passed the Financial Services and Markets Act, which implemented some of the prospectus reforms that were just spoken about. The Edinburgh reforms as well were intended to break away from some of the more onerous and prescriptive regulations that we were previously subject to. But I think it's something we can always do better on. I think in time, technology will help change a lot of this. There are already quite interesting innovations when it comes to AI that will remove a lot of the need for humans to, quite frankly, be doing a lot of the monitoring when it comes to fraud and predicting patterns of behavior and things like that. And so I think it will only get better, frankly, but we constantly need to challenge ourselves.
I know what you mean because, and the media praise its role, it likes easy slots. It's just attacking on the Cayman Islands onto a story about somebody's finances gives the impression that you get. Mark,
So just briefly on the question, Eleanor, completely agree. I think the challenge here is about proportionality. One of the biggest things that we get coming into us when it comes to bank accounts is often, so we do a lot with the diplomatic community. Every now and again, a diplomat will get in touch with us and say, I've tried to open a bank account and I've been told I can't because I'm a foreign individual working at an embassy. I mean, the sort of politically exposed thing we've seen and so on. And we need to be careful, not to over-index on examples like that, because this is something that you run into with small businesses and so on. I mean, we had our bank account shut down at one point by a bank which one of our board members was a senior executive of. So there is a sort of need to make sure that proportionality is in the system. And if we are spending £38 billion, we also need to make sure we're actually getting a bang for our buck that matches that, although, frankly, I think that feels as if it's difficult to justify at those kinds of levels. I think just one other one is we do spend, just when you look, and this is not a pop at our friends from the FCA, if you look at the amount of money that's spent on the fees and levies for the FCA and the PRA, and then the amount of money spent on compliance to match what we need to do to meet that, we're spending more on that than we are on GCHQ, MI5 and MI6 combined. And I don't think that's necessarily the best use of money.
Not that they'll admit it, but they'll be really pleased you said that.
And on the point about the Caymans, completely agree. I mean, we have, and I don't think this gets sufficient attention. I'm conscious we've got a long-standing former chief minister of Guernsey in the audience as well. We've got this network of interconnected financial centres around the UK, around Guernsey, Jersey, put my teeth in, the Cayman Islands, Gibraltar, etc., which if this was any other country, we would be boasting about. If this was France, you wouldn't hear the end of it, that was a massive advantage for France. So I think the standards that have been set are extremely high. It's a mutually supportive network, and I think we should be really proud of it.
Sam, do you want to pick up on one of those?
The only addition I'll add is agree on the proportionality side of things and getting the balance right. And I think in order to ensure that balance is right between business and the regulators, we need to ensure that we keep conversation open and are honest.
I'm going to slip one in for all of you, actually, because it comes to the heart of the question about the Cayman Islands, but also my rather deliberate, if you don't mind, pretense of knowing nothing about it. Isn't that part of the problem, that actually our public doesn't really understand what you all do and why it's important? Consequently, when there's a vacuum there, they fill it themselves. And so far, it seems to me, have always done so slightly negatively. There's something about it all that feels a bit fishy. And you're all saying, hang on, we should be proud of this.
I'm going to argue with the question a little bit in true essay style. So the market research or the public opinion research we've done shows that actually the British public is prouder of financial services than we sometimes realise. Much prouder than a lot of our European competitors. Where I totally agree with you is that too often the debate around financial services in particular is around billions or trillions, and that is just meaningless for the average person in the street. And the research we've done amongst, frankly, most parliamentarians is most parliamentarians aren't really across the role of financial services in their own constituencies. I remember writing to one, we write to parliamentarians regularly telling them how many jobs in their constituency are tied to financial and professional services. And one said, I had no idea, not least because the number of jobs in financial and professional services in my constituency is rather larger than my majority. And so they took it much more seriously after that. But there is this thing that we need to stop talking about, derivatives or trillions of that or whatever. It's about when you buy your home. It's about when you invest for your retirement. It's about when you insure what's important to you and you send your kids to university. It's our industry that makes that possible. Make it real. And we haven't done enough of that. And if I may, I don't think politicians have done enough of that either.
So one of the biggest advice I've always given to any politician on communications is stop talking about numbers, start talking about people. Do you accept... Part of this is not doing a good selling job. I take the point that actually more people are proud than we thought they were. So that's the point I would go to, is that I'm not sure people do realise, A, that they are proud of it, or that they completely understand it. I go back to the one that I always used to think is everybody thinks financial, you're a banker.
I'm not.
No, well, there you go. You see, that's the point.
But it is really important to, I think, bring the conversation back to how the industry impacts the individual. on a day-to-day basis, and whether that's opening a bank account, whether that's you are a small business owner and you are looking to trade overseas, for example, it's really important that we as an industry are ensuring that that message is getting across and we're not just using all the big numbers.
Honestly, a briefing with the Treasury, it's like it scares every other department when they have one, and I think sometimes the Treasury knows that and enjoys it. Have we got this right about the way we speak about it, the way we try and explain the importance, not just of growth, obviously, but of this sector to it?
No, we haven't. And it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, and I agree with everything that's been said in terms of stories and putting it in the context of people's daily lives. But unless people have a stake in it and are playing a part in it, then they'll never fully get it. And I don't blame them, quite frankly. And that's why we have a culture in this country where we are under-saving. We are underinvested for our pension funds. When people have a pension fund, they're invested in the wrong stuff, as Miles was saying. And so we have a lot more to do when it comes to giving people the opportunities to have a stake in the economy. And as I said right at the beginning, it's one of the reasons I was such a strong advocate for ensuring that we have auto-enrollment from 18 to 22, because that, by the way, has been one of the most transformational pieces of public policy that nobody flippant talks about, and it was cross-party.
Yep.
And yet 10 million more people are now saving for a pension than they were before. But we excluded the 18 to 22-year-olds, and so by expanding that, they will see on their payslip an additional line which is a benefit to them and which they will then hopefully take an interest in and feel like they've got more of a stake, and then be more inquisitive about where that money is going. And then you sort of have a knock-on effect. But politicians have a massive part to play in this. Part of the issue, slightly controversial view, is that we don't have enough people in Parliament from this kind of background.
Interesting. I'm going to flip it slightly for you, because there's an assumption that we need a big regulator because you're basically having to police people who don't always behave. Now that in it of itself is a negative impression of the industry.
So we do have three operation objectives, which is to protect consumers, obviously look after market integrity and drive competition in the interest of consumers. But we also now have the secondary objective on growth. So look, do I think that there is a negative term, or we're not proud enough? Yes, I do. I think we aren't proud enough as a society of the great work that the financial services industry does. For everybody, be that protecting the things that they cherish, be that loved ones or items and goods, helping them to get on the property ladder, right the way through to, from the perspective of when they're driving their car or travelling. The vast range of services that are provided, but people don't realise actually, and people do not understand what is in there. Picking up, I do agree with giving people a stake. Auto-enrolment was one of the most transformational things that was driven in terms of UK society and giving people that protection in retirement. But actually, people don't engage with their pensions. So how do we get people to engage with their pensions? How do we nudge that? How do we get that conversation going? But I'm also going to raise something else, and that is financial literacy, actually. Because a core part of driving people's engagement is actually driving understanding, and that people invest in crypto assets. One would argue that they're slightly more risky, perhaps, than investing in the UK stock market. So why is that? Why aren't we having that debate? We do not have the level of financial literacy in the UK that we need in order to drive some of this debate, as well as drive ownership.
I've been in a panel at conference where somebody was suggesting, I think from the financial services industry, but was in the audience, and said, why aren't we teaching more of this financial literacy in schools? And the answer from the panel was, I just don't think that's school's job. Might it be?
Well, I think picking up on Gareth's points around auto-enrolment going down to 18, I have a daughter who has special needs. She has left school not being able to manage money. That cannot be right for anybody in the UK today. We should be driving it from schools right the way through.
If I could just very briefly come in on that. Michael Gove put it on the national curriculum. So financial education is on the curriculum. The problem, and I've worked at 2 large companies with enormous financial literacy campaigns, the problem is we've not equipped teachers to teach it. They're not confident enough to do it.
Yeah. Just quickly, that whole fits in with whatever this party is talking about at the moment about trying to regrow. Every single contender for the leadership is we've got to reach out to younger people. It seems like we had a gift there, and I've sensed frustration that we didn't do that. Okay, fine. Often says more than words. You were very patient, sir, and you've been looking at them. I can't ignore you now. So there you go. 2 questions there, please.
Thanks very much. Chris Pond from Financial Inclusion Commission. And I think all of us in this room believe that financial services has an essential role to play in generating growth. And if you didn't believe that when you came in after the presentation so far, but you do. But the problem is that so many people are locked out of access to those financial services. We've got 1 in 5 households who have no savings whatsoever. We've got 1 in 20 who don't even have a bank account. Not all of them work in embassies, I have to say. And people don't have access to affordable credit, which pushes them into debt. Now, Gareth quite rightly said that one of the ingredients of this is to encourage workforce participation. But if you cannot get car insurance, if you cannot get access to the sort of affordable credit you need to be able to afford the transport into work, you are not going to do it. So the new government has committed itself to a national financial inclusion strategy. The last government also had this as part of its agenda. It had the Financial Inclusion Policy Forum. So the question, first of all, to Gareth is, are we going to see continued emphasis on that from the opposition, working with government, because it's got to be cross-party, it's got to be long-term. And the question to Cherie also, and I have to say, I was also a financial regulator back in the day, but I've been going straight for a number of years since. Is there more that the FCA could and should be doing to promote inclusion in financial services?
All right, well, forgive the pun, but let's bank those 2 for you, Ju. Please.
Charlie Chirico, so I'm a voluntary officer at Melton and Syston Conservative Association. For my sins, I've been a candidate in pretty much every area that you can be a candidate, and a councillor as well. I was keen to hear from Miles about why Boston is so much more attractive, given that you said that we don't actually lack anything that they have. So what do you think that sticking point is? And I think the other thing that I want to ask, I'd like to think that you're all paid up members of the Conservative Party. I'm sure Gareth is. That's one person I can rely on. But I just wondered, if you were able to vote in the Conservative leadership battle, what candidate is most attractive to you, and what are they saying to you that thinks, yes, this is a person that's really going to
And there's the trap right there.
Love it.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I just want to do one thing first, given that we've just got really political. You're all involved in, I'm assuming, interested in financial services. Let's just do a show of hands. Who is worried about the budget coming up? Wondered if that might be the case. All right, thank you very much. Questions directed to you directly. Who would like to pick up first on that one?
I'm happy to go. So look, we are very focused on financial inclusion. We don't have a have regard because we don't have all the levers in the nicest possible way, but we do drive things. We are very focused, for example, on access to cash. We've done quite a lot on provision of bank accounts, and have published things around banks not progressing basic bank accounts, which are there to support those who are currently unbanked. Very focused on driving innovation. So we recently did a financial inclusion tech sprint to drive the innovation and technical solutions, access to credit, etc. But, as I said, we don't hold all the levers. And there are things that we need to work together on as a group of stakeholders across here. Digital ID, helping solve the digital exclusion debate, focusing on poverty, focusing on financial education and literacy. So there are a few things we're very committed to supporting, but we don't have all the levers.
Gareth, you pick up on that.
So I think the fact that we have the number of people we have that are unbanked without any banking facilities is a not just a problem. It's quite frankly, in some regards, shameful. And while I think we have made important strides over the last few years, and we need to recognise that, we need to almost work cross-party on this issue and not just rely on the banks to solve the problem, but just try and figure out how we can all work together on it. And so if I have any role to play in the opposition, of course I will be pressing for that, because it's not just an area of interest for me, but it's something we should all, quite frankly, care about. But I do want to just pick up on, because I lived in Boston for a while, I worked there, I went to school, I did a master's degree in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I visited as a minister, because it is quite interesting what's going on in Cambridge in particular. The thing that stands out that they do really well over there, that we are starting to do actually in this country, but not to the same degree yet, is the incubation and risk-taking and dynamics on financials at university spin-outs. The relationship between the VC community of Boston and Cambridge with Harvard and MIT is, better than we have here at the moment, although it is growing very quickly in our country, at Imperial and Cambridge in particular. But that is something that they have really led the way on. And as a result, it's actually a national security issue, in my view, because what they are developing in Cambridge, Massachusetts benefits the wider civilization and country, because the medicines, the vaccines that they're producing is transforming the world of medicine. So it's not just a financial benefit to the country and the local area, it's a national security issue, and that's why I took it so seriously in government. We had the life sciences focus, and whatever happens next with this new government and our opposition, we have to really nail that.
Miles, we've got the ingredients, but we're not necessarily baking the cake.
So I think that's absolutely right. And to the question, Charlie, what we saw when we looked at Boston was there's a phenomenal cluster effect and a set of experience that's in place. And so it becomes easy to do it, because you've got the investment in place, you've got the investment bankers, you've got fund managers who are familiar with it, you've got a cluster of companies there, you've got a talent pool, you've got the universities. So it's all sort of come together somewhat organically. I mean, it's not as if there's been a sort of state, 5-year plan to deliver life sciences in Boston, but it has come together. And it's also become, interestingly, it's become a sort of mark of quality. That if you're going to grow, you go to Boston. There's a sort of elite element to it that they actually quite lean into. So that's been hugely beneficial. But exactly the way that Giles has just summarised it, we have all of those ingredients here, whether those are in London or Cambridge or Oxford or a number of other cities. And we have underperformed compared to the ingredients that we've got. So it shouldn't be rocket science, he said, mixing his scientific metaphors, to get to where we need to get to. So I'm actually quite optimistic long term that we can do. So far, everybody's ignored your question about who to vote for in the Conservative Party leadership.
I was going to give you all a free pass, but if you want to go for it, go ahead.
But I will also ignore it and merely say that the important thing is that whoever wins that, that they recognise that growth is how you've got to take the country forward. If you look at the challenges from an international investor's perspective, it's not just about talent pool and regulation and tax. Of course, those are important. But everyone assumes that anybody who comes to the UK or is attracted to the UK or grows up in the UK and wants to start a business is focused on the top end stuff. I mean, the reality is you've got to have good public services in place. You've got to have good infrastructure in place, good education. Most people who come to the UK don't put their kids into private education. They use the state system. Most of them will use the trains at some point, or the buses, or the tube, or whatever. And if you've got a sense that the system isn't working because there isn't the growth around it, then the UK becomes less attractive. So whoever the leader of the Conservative Party is who takes that forward, they need to recognise that, again, it's this sort of alchemical mix of a variety of factors, both in the private sector and in the public sector, that make a country appealing. And if you want a fantastic example of that, look at Singapore.
I know, Sam, you're eager to answer a question, except that one.
No, also leave comment on that particular question. But coming to the digital inclusion piece, I think, financial inclusion piece, I think digitalisation will massively change the landscape in this piece. And we need to ensure that it changes the landscape to the better of everyone and ensures that we get better financial inclusion. I will give you a small example that's from India. In 2009, only 17% of Indian adults had a bank account, and today it is 80%, and that is a drive of digitalisation. Now, we're not in the same situation, but you can see the benefits that that reaps.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got time for, you asked me, sir. Yeah, no, let's go there. Gareth, you, by the way, just quickly, you've already declared, haven't you, for a candidate?
Yeah, I'm backing Rob General.
Just to give you an answer. Conservative Home is incredibly impartial on this subject.
I should probably go on about why.
No.
Rather than
He's doing that everywhere.
I'm doing it, so you do it. You know.
I think we've seen the video. Thank you, Gareth. I'm Anthony McKenna from Bedfordshire. I've worked in the pension sector before. I worked in auto enrolments, and I'm pretty glad that we have two different regulators because they invest in different areas of finance and financial inclusion. My question to the panel, given that the Chancellor of the Exchequer 11 years ago at the time of the auto enrolment was being rolled out, she was Shadow Pension Secretary, very opposed to the legislation and the idea that auto enrolment could come around at the time, and she was very prerogative. So my question to the panel, given she's Chancellor, over the next 12 months, what is your biggest concerns?
Okay, we'll bank that one. And there, you got the microphone. There you go.
Jeremy Bennett, former regulator, former banker, and now small business owner.
Well, them all in the scene.
Yeah. But I think, first of all, can I compliment the panel on an excellent discussion? I really, really think this was high quality. I've got a lot of sympathy for Cherie, given my background. This is an incredibly hard balancing act to get this right. But I am going to make an appeal to not keep loading government policy onto banks. One of the reasons there's financial exclusion in this country is because it is incredibly expensive for banks to offer bank accounts. A cash-strapped government cannot keep on asking the financial sector to be the policeman of the world, to be the provider of loss-making services, just because it's a cash-strapped government. So we have to be incredibly careful to preserve what we've got. There is a question in there somewhere, sorry, apologies, but it really is for balance and to try to cut banks a bit of slack.
So I want to make sure that we end on time, but at the same time pack in all of that. Who would like to pick up with first question? And you may want to combine some of that appeal into closing remarks.
From our perspective, the biggest concern would be the concern we'd have whoever was Chancellor. He said, picking his words very carefully. And it would be making sure that we continue to have a competitive place to do business. And that is around tax, it is around regulation, it is around talent, it is around increasingly technology. I mean, our firms are data firms as much as they are companies, and you'll know this, Anthony, companies that deal with capital. We are at sort of stepping back for a moment, I'm actually really optimistic about the UK, medium to long term. I think we have a number of natural advantages. If I was an investor looking at Europe from outside, the UK is the obvious bright spot of all the major economies from a political perspective, a growth perspective, an investment perspective. So it is about working with the grain of what's there. We took a small delegation out to the US in July, right after the election, to DC and to New York. And one of the things, and I'm quite happy to say this publicly, one of the things we were saying was that there's a lot of continuity between what this government's doing, certainly in financial services, compared to what was there before. So the Financial Services and Markets Act, Edinburgh reforms, Mansion House reforms. This new government has been quite clear that it's taken the work that Gareth and his colleagues did in Treasury and is building on it. In full tribute to John Glenn, Andrew Griffith and Bim Afalami, who were city ministers, there were some phenomenal consultations done after Brexit. Now, the challenge is making sure that that is implemented. And I'm not sure that the implementation of that policy has always been where it needs to be. So that's what I'd really like to see out of the Chancellor and the government as it moves forward. And Jeremy, to your question about loading further and further duties onto not just banks, but the rest of the private sector, I think that has built up like silt over the years. And this is not new. This has happened for 25 years. And I think we need to have a really clear sense of, if you're going to do that, there needs to be a sense of what we're trying to achieve, as opposed to it just sort of happening by osmosis and without thinking. And I do worry that we are turning into a caveat vendor rather than a caveat emptor society. And I think that requires a much greater sense of, if we are going to go down that route, fine, let's do it, but we need to be very open to the consequences, and very many negative consequences of doing so.
Quite a lot of politics in these two questions, so I'm going to come to you last of all, if I may, Gareth. Sam?
I will just probably make some closing remarks, if that's all right. So I think there's a couple of things we haven't mentioned today in terms of where the UK could continue to play to its strengths in financial services. And so I just wanted to quickly highlight that green finance, the UK is a very strong player in this in the global sphere, and it's an area of growth, as well as the digital and innovation space. And these are areas where the UK can continue to be competitive and continue to see growth back into the UK. Moving forward, in order for the financial services industry to really give as much back as possible to the economy, we need to ensure that there is a clear direction by government. That needs to be an investment plan, an industrial strategy, that really does provide a nice clear direction. And with that, as I'm sure Gareth will agree, nice open channels of communication between the government, the regulators and industry.
I just on that point about being overloaded with effort and that government can't just keep coming to you, is that fair?
I think it's a balancing act. Everyone comes at it from different angles, and we need to ensure then the conversation is open so that the regulators and government understands the pressure that's on business, but also the business understands where the regulator's coming from.
You've so far been given compliments about this, but do you think you've got the balance right?
Balance is a continuous debate, so that probably is.
You worked in the Foreign Service.
Well, no, I mean, there will always be places where we haven't got the balance right. And that's why, earlier on I was encouraging debate. I was encouraging people to come to us and talk to us about where they don't think we have got the balance right. So we're very open to having that conversation.
And are the channels in place for people to do that, do you think?
I would like to think so. So if I talk about my own world in terms of authorisation, we are opening up the gates to have more conversations with people before they apply, so that we can talk them through the process, so that they can understand, so that we can have an understanding of the business model that they're going to present us with, to hopefully speed up that process. But there's lots of channels that we would open. From my perspective, we are much more open to presenting and being at events and speaking, but also we're very open to people coming to us. We've issued the rule review framework, for example, so people can proactively contact us about rules that they think are disproportionate and need to change. And I would encourage everybody who is in the financial services industry or wider who thinks that there are aspects that don't work to contact us to tell us. In terms of closing remarks, I just want to sort of say we must continue to champion the UK as a global FS leader, drive that investment and drive that growth. And we must, as a UK and society, have the grown-up debate about what that means and where we need to strike the balance of risk, reward and wider aspects.
Thank you very much indeed. There are a lot of political bits in some of those questions at the end there. So we are at Conservative Party conference. We have a Conservative politician with us. Take it all on, and how might some of what we've talked about today inform? We're in opposition. How does that inform policy thinking and where we might go with absorbing some of what's come through to put in at the time, which will, I believe, happen when we're back in contention to be in government?
I think we have a pretty good understanding, actually, of what needs to happen. And just because we've left office doesn't mean we should abandon everything we were doing in office. Actually, I think if you look at the last 3 fiscal events, the OBR scored the growth potential of the measures significantly. And you're starting to see that fruit come to bear now. But, you know, the thing I would say about the opposition, about the government and Rachel Reeves, is that where, you know, there's plenty for us to go on in terms of opposing their policies. There's plenty of things that we can do that on. But where they do good things, we should work with them and acknowledge it, recognise it. They didn't always do that with us, by the way. But we should. And as Miles said, on the pension reform, for example, every indication is that they're going to take that forward. They're holding a global investment summit, and they are engaging with business and the financial services sector in particular. And so we should recognise that, work with them, and applaud that where it is justified. You know, do I get irritated that they're sort of implying it's all their idea and you know, this new global investment summit is brand new and we had one last year? Yes, it is frustrating, but I think we need to be grown up about that, and because frankly we are the grown-ups. So you know, going forward, however, we need to better communicate the values that inform our policy development. Talk more in broad brush rather than in numbers, and a policy which happens when you've been in government a long time, and really think back and broaden out and zoom out as to what that means for everyday people's lives. It's not just true about FS, it's true about government too. That's what I'll be focused on.
Thank you for the compliment, because I thought that was an excellent discussion. I hope you have as well. I want to thank City UK for their ongoing sponsorship of events like this with Conservative Home. Thank you so much, Miles. Thank you to all of you for making time for us and for our audience. We're back at 11:30. We're going to be talking about energy security. If you want to join us, you are most welcome. Thanks very much indeed for your time.